All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Mary Tansky, and I'm the chair in the department. It's nice to see everybody this morning. I am really excited today because, as you know, quarterly we have chairs conferences, but this is our very first in-person traveling chairs conference that we've had since pre-pandemic. So that's pretty amazing. So today I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Graham Walker. Dr. Walker is an emergency physician with the Permanente Medical Group and practices in San Francisco. He attended medical school at Stanford with Bori and completed his residency at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital System, where he also served as chief resident. He completed a medical simulation fellowship at Stanford and has been working at TPMG since 2012. He's been working on AI and advanced development for the medical group under their chief innovation officer. Dr. Walker created MD Calc, which is pretty amazing, and the NNT, which are two free evidence-based online resources to help physicians integrate evidence into their clinical practice. He also published the Physician's Charter for Responsible AI, which is a roadmap written by physicians for safely integrating AI into clinical practice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Walker.
Hi guys, thank you so much. I am really excited to be here. I was walking around OHSU with Bori this morning, and I felt like a med student, like getting a little tour of here's the OR and the Children's Hospital, and this is the wing to the VA. So it was like super weird because we went to med school like 20 years ago, and now I'm old enough to be invited back. So thank you, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys today about the future of technology in medicine. That's what I'm going to pitch to you. I'll do my little disclosures here. Like Mary said, I work at TPMG, which is the medical group for Northern California. We're like 10,000 doctors. We serve 4 million patients. We're hiring for you third-year residents. And you know, my disclosure is I think we have a really great model of care that we deliver for our patients. I also created the NNT and MD Calc, like Mary said. I like to build stuff and get tools in front of physicians because I think if physicians have better tools, then that like turns into better care for patients as well. And then I created the Physician's Charter with MD Calc as well. This was like last summer. We all started to like think, oh my God, AI is going to take over the world, and we wanted to at least have a general sense of like the physician and the patient needs to stay at the center of everything. If we're going to introduce AI, it should be safe, fair, and accurate. And so you can go to physicianscharter.ai and just like read the thing if you want. It's created by me and like 10 other practicing physicians from around the world. And then in full disclosure, I used OpenAI and Claude 3 to help me with this talk. Now, I'm trying to model like a good, safe, appropriate way for you to use AI. AI didn't create any of these slides. I worked way too hard on these slides. I want all the credit. But AI, you know, I use these tools as like a pretty good research librarian to like help me bounce ideas when I was trying to come up with like how it would create with these themes and these symbols and stuff like that. And so if you have ChatGPT Plus, I pay for it and use it. And like there's a audio mode where you can just, it's kind of like that movie Her. You can just like talk to ChatGPT. So I'll like just go on a 40-minute walk with my dog, and I just like talk with ChatGPT and like it will give me ideas, and I'll bounce ideas off it. I want to say Her because I use a female voice with it, but it's not a real thing. But just to be fair, you may know that these things can hallucinate, right? They can make up facts, make up information. So everything for my talk, I have fact-checked. ChatGPT has not made any of my talk, but I do want to like acknowledge that it helped me make this talk, and I think it's a good way that you can use AI safely. So let's get started. Initially, I was going to ask you guys this question. Should doctors guide how AI works? I think probably everybody in the room would say yes, but I think really the question I want to ask you is this one. Will doctors guide how AI works in healthcare? And I don't think we necessarily know that answer to that question, and I'm going to hopefully convince you of why this question is really important. So I'll start with a quote here, and I will read this quote, and then I'll stop reading my slides. I promise. I just think this is a really good and interesting quote. When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. And when you invent electricity, you invent electrocution. Every technology carries its own negativity, which is invented at the same time as technical progress. So I'm here to tell you that AI is absolutely going to create new problems. It certainly already has, right? But I'll talk about some of those problems today, but I'll also talk about all the opportunities that I think we have with AI. And I will say that I think if anyone should be ready and able to handle these problems, it's a group of physicians and healthcare professionals. We shouldn't leave this to other groups of people like big tech or Meta or Facebook or anything like that. So here's what I'm going to tell you. AI is going to change society, and medicine specifically it will. And right now we have a really unique opportunity to shape where AI goes in healthcare. And if we don't do it, somebody else will, and they will absolutely do it worse than us. This is my key thing that I always think about. If you think about anything in healthcare, or really any part of society, if the internal group kind of regulates or manages it itself, that group typically does a better job than like Congress or a regulator or something like that, because you know what it's like to practice medicine. Okay, so we're going to talk about AI, but I also want people to know that AI is already here. So I think some people are really scared of AI, but if you use Instagram, Netflix, if you type on an Apple iPhone keyboard, that's all AI. That's machine learning telling you which Instagram feeds to follow, which Netflix show you what you're going to watch next, or like, what's the next word you're probably going to type out. So AI is already here. It's been here for many years, but it's certainly starting to accelerate around the world and certainly become more prominent in medicine as well. So when I was thinking about this talk, I realized I'm going to be in Oregon in the Willamette Valley. I said Willamette correctly. And, I'm from Kansas City, so I'm like 30 minutes from Independence, Missouri, where the Oregon Trail started. And Bori said, like, nobody talks about the Oregon Trail in your lecture, so I was like, this is actually I always think about the Oregon Trail when I think of Oregon. And then I started to think, like, okay, when I was reading more about it, I was like, this is actually kind of a really good, like, symbol for AI, right? The Oregon Trail was kind of unknown, it was scary, there was a lot of risk, there were a lot of challenges, but there were a lot of opportunities. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll use the Oregon Trail while at Oregon Health Sciences University to talk about AI. But, this is like the official map of the Oregon Trail from Wikipedia, but I don't think about the Oregon Trail that way. I think of the Oregon Trail like this. So if you're like, maybe if you're interns, you don't know what this is, but like raise your hand if you like literally have any idea what I'm talking about. Okay, good. Okay, so this is obviously how I think about the Oregon Trail, and you can actually play this entire video game online in your browser if you really want to like bring back. For me, I was like probably like 10, 11, something like that. But obviously, if you don't know what the Oregon Trail was, it was a computer game. This was before we called them video games, and it was like semi-educational, right? You could tell your teacher, oh, I'm doing an educational activity, but really you're just like playing video games. But so I was reading about the Oregon Trail, and like I could, I'll give you a few quick facts from Wikipedia. It's like 2,000 miles long. It cost $42,000 in today's dollars, so that was like $800 back in 1840s money. But just imagine like saving up $42,000 and then it taking you 6 months to cross the country when like I literally flew here in an hour and a half, right? So imagine all that, and then anybody want to guess what was the mortality rate estimated on the Oregon Trail? Throw out some numbers. 25? 60? It was 10. I still think that's pretty high. It was 10. But like, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think 10's pretty good for like a 6-month journey. Like, but I have to have this slide up here. But so most people that died of an infectious disease, right? So they died of dysentery, cholera, pneumonia, things like that. And that's what most people died of. You had to like go hunting for your food, or you had to like buy a bunch of, like bacon or something like cured meat that you had to buy in Independence, Missouri, you had to like rough the weather, right? You didn't know what you were going to hit. You could hit a hailstorm. Certainly in the earlier days, the trail was just like barely a trail, so you could get lost. And then, of course, you had to cross rivers, and you had to decide, like, am I going to pay the ferryman to, like, for $5 to get me across the river, or am I going to risk it? Maybe it floods, maybe my wagon wheel breaks down. So there's, like, a lot of risk involved. And so I'm thinking to myself, I'm reading this whole Wikipedia article, because, like, that's mostly how I'm, like, reading about this. And really the question is, like, why would anybody want to do this? It's 6 months long. It costs $42,000. And you actually realize, well, it's because there were a lot of crises. Like, things were actually really bad. I'm sure we probably all learned about the Panic of 1837, but I had somehow forgotten about it. But so this was terrible. So in 1837, 40% of U.S. banks fail. Just think about that. 40% of banks fail. There's mass unemployment, and it isn't just like a 2008, brief crash or like the crash during COVID. It is for 7 years, right? So COVID was 4, so add 3 years. It's a 7-year recession where there's like no jobs, and people are, this is like an old cartoon of like this guy's like, oh, I have no money, my kids are hungry, and then the guys over there are like, where's the rent? Right? So that is terrible. And of course, the main thing I think we have in common with this is that it was due to a real estate speculation. So that is, the cause of the prior bubble in the United States. So it's not just one crisis, but there's a second one. So remember that actually in this time in the 1840s, most Americans are farmers. Right? Most Americans are not working in tech or in healthcare. They're farmers. So you have crop failures. This picture on the right is like the declines in rainfall, and there's the biggest spike from the 1590s in the U.S. is in the 1840s. So now you have a majority farmer group of people who have crop failures, who either now can't sell their crops or use their crops to actually like feed humans, to feed their family. And then you hear like, hey, it rains a lot out in the Pacific Northwest, and you start to think, okay, this kind of does make sense. Like I could kind of see why people would uproot their family of like, the wife, the husband, and like eight of their kids, and like risk going where they've never been out there out to the Pacific Northwest before, and risk it all with a 10% mortality to try to like make a better life for their families. So this is a little bit of the way I think about things, right? Crisis, of course, is terrible. A drought is terrible. Mass unemployment is terrible. But crisis actually, I think, can be a good thing. I think it forces human beings to like have a different way to look at the world. We're way more open to like acknowledging that like, well, maybe this way we do things isn't that great, and maybe there's a better way. Way more open to change. We have, I think, crisis can make people really hopeful that there's like a new wave of way of kind of living their lives. I think we saw that with COVID, right? People really stepped up. The people in this room all stepped up, and we like took care of people despite risk to our own health. But I would also say that we're in crisis today in healthcare. And I probably don't need to convince anybody in this room of this, but I listed like 30 things that were all terrible about healthcare, and I just picked 12. But like, obviously burnout, people don't want to work these days, that like Kim Kardashian quote. I personally think patients are way more complex and way older, but I guess I'm older too. But I really think patients have really different expectations for what their care is now too, right? We were talking at dinner last night, when the wait is like 6 or 9 months or like over a year to see derm or to see nephrology or urology, it seems kind of reasonable that patients have different expectations too. I think everybody has mental health needs across the entire world. There's still a lot of health disparities. There's still problems with substance use. There's care delays. There's ED boarding. We're getting hacked and phished, and like hospitals are getting shut down. Like their EHR just doesn't work at all if they're getting attacked with ransomware. And then, of course, there's moral injury. So like, there's a lot of problems that I don't remember feeling like 10 years ago when I was like a pretty new attending out of residency. You guys know this. Doctors feel burnt out. We feel overwhelmed with the demands from our patients. We want to retire early, or we want to just quit or find a side hustle or find some way out of medicine. This, I think, is the scariest slide in my entire talk. So if you look at, do we have any med students in the audience? Yay! Oh, that's awesome. Well, if you poll said med students, this is a survey from last year. If you poll medical students, I don't know if you can see that well, but the top left graph here is a question: I'm considering quitting my medical or nursing studies. So this is med students and nursing students. 25% of medical students were thinking about quitting last year, and 21% of nursing students in the U.S. And if you look at the bottom right, this is a question asking medical students if they think their final career will be at the bedside, will be seeing patients. 63% of medical students in the United States do not expect to be seeing patients. Now, I don't know if that number is actually going to be true, but just imagine that the majority of people in medical and nursing training are thinking of something else they want to do with their degree that is not actually treating patients. That should be terrifying to everybody in this room, because you will eventually need health care. Your parents probably need health care now. It should be extremely scary. And then the only thing I will tell you that is even scarier than this, oops, I lost my big climax there. The only thing that's scarier is that this is a global survey. So I'm highlighting the US, but this is not about the American healthcare system. Now, the American healthcare system sucks for a lot of reasons, but this is not unique to the US. So this means there's something going on in the world that has changed that most people, besides Latin America, which is like a little bit of an outlier here, most of the rest of the world's medical students and people in training have something that they're like, maybe I could do something besides see patients. Now, whether that's the patient expectations thing, whether that's that the patients are more complex, whether it's that the job is, not as enjoyable as it used to be, I don't know, but this should be really scary to everybody here. We have nursing and doctor shortages. You can look at lots of different studies that give big estimates, and part of this is due to the projections of physicians and nurses leaving the bedside because they can find something else they'd rather do. And then part of it is also just that people are going to be getting older, the baby boomers are going to be aging, and that's going to cause increased needs for patients and doctors and nurses. So if you still believe that crisis is a good thing, I am here to tell you that I think AI is one of the ways that we can solve it. And next I want to kind of show you the ways in which AI I think could be really helpful, and I'll do that through a bunch of studies that have already come out to make this more academic for this lecture here today. So when you create the ship, you create the shipwreck. I was thinking to myself, well, how am I going to tell everybody what I think AI could do? And I was like, okay, well, what do I do? What does a doctor actually do with your time? And so I came up with this big, long list of all the stuff that doctors do. And I'll take the stuff on the left in the white just for time's sake. And I'll give you little examples of how AI, I think, can help with all these things. And then I'll also introduce some of the risks, right? Because this is not going to be risk-free. There are going to be some challenges that are going to need to get solved around ethics, around regulatory things. The whole healthcare system, I think, is going to change because of this. So diagnosis, obviously an important part of medicine. This, I think, is one of the coolest studies I've ever seen in AI, and that's why I started with it. This is a study where they took UK biobank data. So the UK is a massive database of a lot of different types of medical and healthcare data. They took data from people's Apple Watches and from their Fitbits, anything that has an accelerometer in it that's in this data bank. And then they were able to actually predict who was going to end up with Parkinson's disease with pretty good accuracy. So if you look at the area under the curve here, 0.8, right, is extremely good. If you add in some genetic factors and some risk factors, this study was predicting that they might be able to tell somebody they were going to have Parkinson's disease with pretty decent accuracy up to 7 years ahead of time. So just imagine what that could do to you or your family member to know, hey, you have maybe, I don't know, a 60% chance that within the next 7 years, you're going to be starting to show clinical signs of Parkinson's disease. Would you live your life differently? I think I would, just to know that you have that condition. And even if you didn't necessarily know that, know for sure that you would develop that, you probably would maybe travel more, or take advantage of the time that you have until you potentially develop Parkinson's disease. And this also adds in this other idea that there's actually a lot of data that humans just we can't see, we can't detect. So a lot of this accelerometer and gyroscope data is just like fine little motor things that the patient cannot feel, a doctor cannot see, but that actually the thing sitting on your wrist is like it's very obvious this person is developing a tremor, right? So that's just a really interesting thing that we maybe don't need a bunch of crazy new lab tests. We maybe actually have all the data we need to do a lot better diagnostic care for people. This is another interesting study because it was actually a randomized blinded trial of AI. We don't get that much in kind of AI studies. And what this author did was he took people getting an echo, and then he either had an AI estimate ejection fraction, or they had an echocardiographer estimate ejection fraction, and then they blinded those results and then had a cardiologist do what they normally do, like interpret an echo. And what they found was the cardiologists were less likely to make changes to the ejection fraction rating, having the cardiologist be like the gold standard, than the sonographer. So this kind of speeds up diagnosis, right? You could potentially get to a diagnosis faster, because even if you're still having a human being read it, well, the human is less likely to have to change things because the AI is giving a better estimate. But this also brings up a really interesting thing called automation bias, and this is a human bias that we humans have that causes problems. Automation and bias is when we tend to just like believe computers because they're computers. So, if you're like looking at a CT scan and the radiologist has put a circle around something, you like immediately go to the circle. Well, that's the same problem that we have with AI and computers. If an AI or a computer flags something, or turns it red, or puts a circle around it, we humans are like, oh, well, the computer must know more than I do, so I'm going to pay mostly attention to what the computer says. So that's a problem, because if the computer's wrong, but we're focused over here, and actually there's a dissection over here on the CT scan, we may miss that. And that's a human problem that we have, because we just tend to believe that computers are like more objective than we are. And they probably are, but when they're wrong, it's devastatingly wrong. This might have you question like that the body systems are not connected to each other. So the title of this article is correct. The concept is you can predict chronic kidney disease from an EKG. That to me, when I read that, I was like, that's not possible. That doesn't seem like that would make any sense. But I'll explain kind of how they did the study, and that it worked really quite well, especially for young people who you'd expect to not have chronic kidney disease. So if you find something on their EKG that looks like it could be predicting chronic kidney disease, it's more likely to be accurate. So this is like any other study, like if you take the Wells score or the pediatric appendicitis score, it's the same concept. You take a group of people that have a diagnosis, and then you, like CKD, and then you have them do an EKG. And you take a group of people that don't have the diagnosis and have them do an EKG, and then you just tell this deep learning model, you figure it out. Like, come up with a way to predict one from the other. And then you run it through a new group of people, right? You validate it in a new population, and then see if it works. And this comes up with the idea of interpretability for me. This is the idea, and these authors included interpretability in their study. If you see these little pink marks on the EKG here, this model the authors kind of forced this model to explain itself and say why it's saying that this person has chronic kidney disease and that one doesn't. And so it would like highlight, oh, look, there's a problem with this QRS complex, and that's why I'm saying it. Or there's a problem with the P wave, whatever it is. And this is important because, like when you're doing the Wells score, or you're looking at a CAT scan, you have a general sense if the CT scan is a true positive or a true negative, or a false positive or a false negative, because you know the components that made up that score. You can actually look at the images yourself and get a sense for, do you think there's an appendicitis or kidney stone or whatever. But in these models, they often don't tell you why they're telling you what they're telling you. They just say, yep, chronic kidney disease. And you as the doctor have to then decide, well, do you believe that, or is this falsely positive or falsely negative? So the fact that some tools are able to give a human interpretation of why they're saying what they're saying helps the model be a lot stronger, because you can actually, if it highlighted like the age of the patient on the EKG, you'd be like, oh, well then obviously this is not working properly. It's just using the age as a proxy for chronic kidney disease. One last diagnosis study, because I think this is an area that's really important that we get diagnosis right. This was a paper out of the UK looking at melanoma diagnoses with just a cell phone camera. And if you look closely at the paper, it sounds really impressive. Like it caught all 59 melanomas. And that sounds really good, but then this brings to another type of bias that's critically important, and that there are two types of biases. I'll talk about representation and diagnostic bias. So representation bias, the UK is mostly white people like me. You can imagine most of those melanomas were in white people as well. These models are only able to predict things they've seen before, right? So if you we're trying to look at melanoma on a person of a different skin color, or just a melanoma of a different part of the body, right? Ocular melanoma, those like toenail melanoma things, like those things, these tools would not be able to diagnose if they're just looking at skin. So that's representation bias. If your AI tool is trained on something that doesn't represent the people that you're using it on, it's not going to work at all. And then the second one is diagnostic bias. If we tend to follow certain algorithms or do certain things in certain groups of people, right, that's bias, then the AI is going to learn that. The AI is really good at finding patterns. Now, bias doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, right? We don't look for Kawasaki's disease in the geriatric population because they don't have that, but that is a bias, right? So the machine will learn, oh, these doctors never look for Kawasaki's disease in a geriatric population. That must mean something, and it does, right? That's a bias that makes sense. But you can imagine any other type of bias that's either conscious or unconscious that we don't mean to do, but that we do because we're human and we're flawed, failed creatures and we're not perfect, that the AI is going to detect that as well. You guys are mostly in emergency medicine space, so I just had to include something about sepsis. This is an interesting study about the treatment of sepsis. Okay, you know how you'll have patients that they both have pneumonia and they're both septic with pneumonia, but they have wildly different labs and wildly different vital signs, and one you tube immediately and the other one is just chilling and they're totally fine. You're like, how are these people different? They're both septic. Well, this machine learning model from University of Pittsburgh actually said, well, there's probably 4 types of sepsis, and we all lump them together, and that's the whole problem, right? There's people that have a really high lactate, but normal vitals, or the people who have normal vitals, or have profoundly hypotensive, but their lactate's 2. That has never made any sense to me. And this guy would argue that there's actually 4 types of sepsis, and that's why. So he ran all these septic patients through a machine learning model and said, hey, could you figure out why there are differences in these people? And if you compare all of the 4 different sepsis phenotypes to each other, you see there's a bunch of stuff that's diametrically opposite from each other when you compare them. Some will have renal failure versus others will have no problem with their kidneys at all. Some will have altered mental status, others will not. So to me, this brings up an interesting regulatory challenge, right? We all have these quality metrics about giving 30 per kilo and antibiotics after blood cultures and all this stuff. Well, AI and all these tools are going to come up with better treatment algorithms much faster than the quality metrics and Joint Commission and Medicare can adapt. So we're going to have to find people that can influence the government, influence the quality metric people to say, hey, actually in the beta form of sepsis, I'm not supposed to give the person 30 per kilo of fluid. That's actually going to be bad for them, but I should start pressors early if they're hypotensive, whatever, right? So there's going to be way more information on how to manage subsegments of populations better. But if we don't have the regulatory frameworks that literally get us all paid and get the hospitals paid, that's going to create massive problems for us to do the right thing if our bosses are saying, well, you did the right thing, but we can't get any money for that patient. It's a sad reality of the world. This is a study, this is actually a tool that we use at my hospital and my 19 hospitals in Northern California. It's called Advanced Alert Monitoring. Essentially what it's trying to do is like find people that are like sitting on the floors and they're like starting to circle the drain. So it looks at 99 variables, and like every hour it like recalculates people's risk score of like, you know, essentially needing to go to the ICU or death during the hospital stay. So the way it works is we have like a centralized human who is like monitoring all of the patients, and then when somebody turns, you know, red, one of the patients turns red, that human then calls the local nurse and says, hey, Mr. Jones in 6412, just, you know, his vitals just went off red. So now you need a nurse and a hospitalist to go see the patient and figure out what's wrong. So this is going to change the way that we're going to need to use humans, right? You need to hire an extra nurse or an extra couple nurses to be able to not be assigned to patients so they can actually just go leave and go round on patients who are decompensating. And this tool actually is a black box. This tool doesn't tell the doctor or the nurse why it's saying this patient's mortality is going up. So the nurse and the doctor have to figure that out. Now, usually that's pretty easy, right? You can like trend the vitals, you can look at the patient, you can like see the lactates climbing or the hemoglobin's dropping. Usually that's easy for them to do because it's a really short outcome. The problem is, imagine if this outcome was, oh, their 90-day or their 6-month mortality is going up. That's extremely hard. What do you do with that information, right? So if it was a longer time scale, you might actually need the model to explain itself and say, oh, well, we saw a problem with their EKG or something like that. Because who knows, how do you reduce somebody's 6-month mortality if you don't know what the machine thinks they're going to die from? This is a really interesting study looking at screening and mammography. So you know that like most of the time screening tests are either like positive or negative, or sometimes, you know, a mammogram might say, you know, really dense tissue. It's a non-diagnostic study, right? This is a study from the Kaiser researchers in Walnut Creek, and they're finding that there's probably a third class of mammogram, and it's like high risk normal. And we may start seeing this with other types of screening tests or other types of diagnostic tests. So if you're a high-risk normal, let me be clear, that doesn't mean this person has cancer. In fact, if you tried to biopsy their breasts and find cancer, you would not find cancer. But there is something on their mammogram, it's like a few pixels here or a few pixels there, or a little bit of calcium here where it shouldn't be, that says, hey, this person is way more likely to develop cancer in the next 5 years than the true normal, right? So what do you do with that information? Well, maybe you take that group of people and you decide to do extra imaging on them in 6 months or a year. Or if that person misses their next year mammogram, you like hound them and call them more because you don't want to miss a mass or something like that. But this tool as well does not tell the radiologists why it's saying what it's saying. So that you obviously need a tool to be extremely accurate if you're going to then kind of expect the system to then more aggressively track this certain group of people. I think I've just got 2 more studies here. I really like this study because it suggests that maybe AI is actually better than us in some ways. So this is a mental health chatbot in the UK. It's live. It's a company called Limbic. The people in the UK can use it now. And the idea is you can like chat with the chatbot if you're feeling down or anxious or whatever. And the chatbot will offer to let you self-refer to get further care with a human, right? So you can self-refer and say, you know, I think I really would like to talk to a therapist or see a psychiatrist about my depression or whatever. But you don't have to. It's optional, but it's a self-referral. And what did they find? Well, they found with minority groups, there were way, way, way higher rates of self-referral in certain minority groups. So this top group is gender identity. That group in the middle is people who identify as non-binary. This is, I think, white and non-white, essentially, and it also breaks it up into different ethnic groups. So there's a lot of hypotheses about why this is, right? Is it that these groups don't feel comfortable with the medical system? Is it that they just like talking to a chatbot more? Is it that the chatbot doesn't have a, you know, if maybe they're not, you know, if it's someone that is Cambodian and there's not a lot of Cambodian doctors in the UK, because the chatbot doesn't have an ethnicity or a race or a gender, maybe the person feels more comfortable. We don't really know, but it is really interesting that if you use a chatbot, you're way more likely to engage in self-referral to get further care. But it also brings up some risk, right? This is a mental health tool that does summarize information and eventually does get back to a human. But like, if someone's depressed or having suicidal thoughts, to me that seems risky to just have them just chatting with a chatbot. And to be fair, this tool does have good safety mechanisms, but it is just a risk. It's a new way that we're going to have to be thinking about how to handle these cases. My last slide here is on compassion. You may have seen this. This study's from Google, and essentially they took a bunch of fake standardized patients, and they took a bunch of primary care doctors and AI, and they have the standardized patient either chat with a doctor or chat with the AI, and then they just had people review the transcripts and looked at how empathetic, how accurate, how thorough the tool was. And at least in this study, it looked like the chatbot was more empathetic than the human. Now, I'm not surprised at this at all, right? If you've ever used ChatGPT or Claude or Bing or any of these things, these tools are way more able to write flowery, empathetic language because they have infinite time in the world versus the human doctor has 40 messages to get through. They're tired and exhausted, and they're like, yeah, make an appointment, right? So I'm not surprised at this at all, but this to me brings up just the need for real-world validation. I think these tools could be really powerful. They could be more empathetic, but it's also possible that patients get sick of this eventually. If you've used ChatGPT long enough, and I use it a lot, sometimes you get a little tired of how verbose it is with all its descriptions, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea, Graham. And it's like, oh, just tell me what you really think. So I think these tools need real world validation because they may be really useful, but it also could be that in a year people are like, well, I miss a typo, or I miss people not being flowery to me because that's a sign that it's actually a human talking to me. And people want that connection to an actual human that feels like they care about them. So that was a big, long whirlwind through all of AI in medicine very quickly. But this is just the beginning, and just think of it this way. This is the worst that AI is ever going to be, right? Moving forward, AI will only get better. It'll only get more accurate. It'll only get faster. So to me, that's really exciting that there's all this stuff that seems really impressive to me, and this is literally the worst it's ever going to be. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I do think it will be better for everybody. In this last section of my talk, I want to kind of hopefully motivate you to get involved, and I'll give you two reasons why here. The last time we had a big tech thing that happened in medicine, it was the EHR, and I don't think we were totally ready for it. I think we're kind of paying the price for that, and I will show you some examples of big tech is trying to do this for us, and it's actually, to me, pretty scary what they're trying to do. So I think the promise of the EHR, and I went to medical school and graduated in 2008, and so I still use paper a little bit. I still use an EHR a little bit, so I know the differences between the two. I am not at all saying I want to go back to paper, but I think there's just things that we could learn from having the EHR kind of placed upon us instead of us being an active participant in the rollout of the EHR. I think it's been a mixed bag. I think we were promised this panacea, and probably no EHR would ever be a panacea. It's always going to be a challenge, but maybe we just set our expectations differently. I don't want to go back to paper. I already said that. I will say that again. I think specifically for emergency medicine, the EHR has been vastly helpful for us because we don't know our patients, right? Show of hands here, I'm just curious, how many people have used paper charts? Okay. So if you ever had to call down to medical records and ask for the patient's chart, and if it was somebody that was frequent in the hospital, you literally got a stack this big of papers to try to figure out how to manage these patients. And it was just notes upon notes upon notes upon notes. So I don't want to go back to paper. And I do think the EHR has been a success. I mean, I literally sit on our EHR steering committee. I'm in charge of the ER and urgent care. I'm not like I'm not anti-EHR, but I just think it could be better. I think we should learn from that. So I think the EHRs were challenged for a lot of reasons. Back in the 2000s, there was this act called the High-Tech Act, and it really literally paid hospitals to adopt EHRs. But it had a pretty tight time schedule, at least on medical time frame. And because there was a relatively short time window, there wasn't a lot of time for like, let's all get in a room together and hear about how we feel about the EHR. It's just kind of like take what you get. Certainly, I think it's getting better today, but a lot of the, like, you guys Epic? We're Epic. Epic, yeah. I mean, a lot of Epic, especially at the very beginning, was like very cookie cutter, assumed everybody did the exact same thing. Physicians tend to be really resistant to change, right? I think that, to me, I understand why. We don't want to try new things when we know this way works for our patients and we're scared of something that is different. I think we're also scared of that stuff because we don't get time to be trained on it, right? If we all had 4 hours a month to get trained in the new changes to the EHR or a new workflow, it'd be probably pretty easy, but it'd also be like extremely expensive for the hospital to have thousands of doctors not seeing patients for 4 hours. And then, you know, I think the reason that, like, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen, that whole thing, or the fact that everything is, you know, there's a lot of focus on billing, or that we have to do so many clicks to get through a chart, is because a lot of the focus for the EHR was on administrative needs, not on the needs of physicians. You know, it assumed that an ER doctor does the same thing as an oncologist or a surgeon or a pathologist, and we obviously have very different needs for what we need from an EHR. And then I think we didn't really have great advocacy from physicians. There were informatics groups, but now like every single specialty has like an arm or like an interest group for informatics because we like are now interested in this space and we're like trying to fix some of the challenges with informatics. So why is AI going to be a challenge? It's the exact same stuff, like, right? So we should learn from all of this stuff and then use what we've learned to then apply it to rolling out the EHR, or rolling out AI. So I will say that the technology companies are absolutely building healthcare tools, and I think they're doing a better job than in the past. Microsoft mostly wants to do stuff where they're partnering with people, I think is a good thing, but it's certainly not all that way. And AI tools, especially like ChatGPT, make it really easy. Like, I'm literally talking like 6 or 10 lines of code to like make it seem like you're running like the chatbot is acting like a doctor. So I think we need to put forth a better vision. Here's one example. This guy, Martin Shkreli, he's like a convicted fraudster guy. He was like the finance bro guy, if you remember him from like 10 years ago. So he made one. He just registered a domain name. This is drgupta.ai. Sounds really official. It looks really official, right? Look at the right side of the screen. You can plug in your vital signs, what your past medical history is. You can type in your meds. You can put in your labs, and then you can start to chat with this thing, right? That looks pretty good. It seems like a nice alternative to, you know, paying a $50 copay to see your doctor. But before you chat, you have to agree that this is not to be used for medical or clinical diagnoses. This is not intended to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent any disease or condition, and you will not hold Dr. Gupta liable if you have any problems. And for that pleasure to just, you know, like not actually use this for anything clinical to actually help a patient, you have the privilege of being charged $20 a month. So that's one example. This is another company called Docus. Similar idea. You can chat with a little chatbot. Here's the little different, you know, pricing tiers. If you want to pay $15 a month, you can send it 500 messages. If you want to pay premium for $50 a month, what do they call it? A top doctor will validate one of your chat transcripts for $50 a month. Now, you know, there's a list of a bunch of doctors. There are like a bunch of European doctors and some American doctors. You probably can sign up for this thing too, but that is what these people want to charge patients for to access their services. And I'll just say I have nothing against these guys that made this company Docus. They're all tech guys. I'm sure they're nice people, but I'll just tell you, these people have never diagnosed a patient. They've never missed a diagnosis. They've never made an error or a mistake. They've never harmed a patient, like probably all of us in this room have. And so I just don't think that this group of people takes seriously what it is that we do every day, right? They spun up a website, they added in some credit card processing, and boom, they can start to deliver healthcare. But I worry greatly if that is the bar that we're setting. I've got two more examples. Somebody from LinkedIn sent this to me. This was a tech company that wanted this was a nurse that sent it to me, that wanted a nurse to talk like they're taking care of a patient, so that essentially the kind of medical speak, like the way we talk, could then be understood by a bot, and then the bot could learn to talk that way. So again, this is just a tech company, has nothing to do with medicine, but they want access to make it sound medical-y, but they don't want to put in the work of like actually going to medical school or doing a residency or anything like that. This is a group of programmers and data scientists who built a model that they said was like really trained for medical care. And this is from them, this is the best example that they had. They concluded, the bot was concluding that for warfarin, which obviously not the safest thing in the world to screw up, for warfarin, the bot said the best way to dose warfarin, if you wanted to do 2.5 milligrams, would be to take a 3 milligram pill and split it up into sixths, and then take 5 of those sixths. And this was their example, right? Because they don't know. They're not in medicine. So they think, well, wow, yeah, look, the computer can figure out how to dose warfarin. That's incredible. So I think we have a lot of work to do. My slides are turning bright here because I'm trying to motivate you, but I really think this is a once-in-a-career opportunity. We literally get to decide, does AI in medicine go this way or does it go that way? We get to, we have the opportunity right now before it's too late that somebody else comes up with a better vision. I really think we've got to tell people what we expect and the requirements for how AI needs to work in healthcare. Here's my vision, right? I would love a trusted co-pilot that helps me not screw up. I would love, we're double coverage overnight in our ER, and so sometimes we pick each other's brains, right? It's like, oh, this patient has numbness and hair pain. Is that a thing? Or, it's like, no, it's fine. And then I'm like, okay, great. But I would love a curbside that I trust, that's trained in the world's knowledge, the world's medical knowledge. Doesn't that sound incredible? I would love a worker bee that just does my work notes or does paperwork that I don't, I don't want to do. And then I'd love something that can predict the future better, right? We're still using ABCD2 and scores from the 90s, very old ancient scores, because it's what we in medicine have decided is the best case scenario. And I think AI can actually really help us come up with way, way, way better prediction scores that could mean that you could safely discharge somebody without necessarily having to admit them because they got 4 points and they were a high-risk TIA or something like that. So, this is where I'm trying to inspire you guys. You guys know what your problems are, right? You know what is challenging on your shifts day to day. You know what your patients also struggle with, whether it's taking their medicines appropriately or just understanding their disease. So use that information about what you know to then decide what you would want from an AI tool. And then, the more we have people in medicine talking about this, and it's hard, right? We're all seeing patients all day. It's a little bit easier for tech companies because they're sitting behind computers and they don't have a different amount of work that they have to do. So this is extra work that I'm saying that I think medicine needs to do, but I think we have to do it because otherwise we'll end up with where we were with the EHR, or we'll have some other monstrosity that a tech guy is coming up with that's actually dangerous to patients and tries to kind of compete with giving adequate medical care to people. So I'll just wrap up here. Anybody know why the Oregon Trail died out in the 1860s? Yes, it was the Transcontinental Railroad. Right? So it was a safer, faster, and more efficient way to get out here. And I would argue that AI will also be a safer, faster, and more efficient way to deliver care, but it's not going to be easy, right? It is going to be a challenge. There's going to be regulatory and ethical, like so many problems that are going to need to be solved. But this is some of the way that like people are talking about AI will make new jobs. There will be new problems that need to be solved here. So I will finally close with the question I asked you at the beginning. Will doctors guide how AI works in healthcare? I think that is up to us. Thank you. If that's my email, if you want to shoot me an email. I quit Twitter a couple of years ago, but I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn talking about AI and healthcare operations. And then if you want to see my chat transcripts from OpenAI, it's all on my website, gramazon.com. Questions? Yeah.
How do you think we should approach, I guess, solving these problems that are motivated AI, really in terms of the tech experience? And obviously, we can't do this without tech experience.
Yeah.
Their motivation is obviously to make websites where they can earn billions and make a profit off of this, rather than everyone like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could predict Parkinson's? How do we make money off of that?
Yeah.
We can hypothesize and write papers and stuff like that, but like, how are we actually going to approach creating?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it will come from academics and people who are just curious, first of all. But I think ultimately there probably will be some structures where health systems and insurers will incentivize usage of new models, like a Parkinson's model or something like that, and those models will be paid for, right? Because there will be money saved by diagnosing Parkinson's earlier, or money saved by not having to admit somebody to the hospital necessarily. And so probably creators of these models will get a cut of the money, and that will motivate them. There's a great group that's just kicking off called TrAIl. It's, I think, Computers, or Healthcare and AI Partnership. It's a partnership of a bunch of academic medical centers, Google, Microsoft, and a bunch of thought leaders. And so that I have hope for, that it will be like the tech people will provide the resources, but the leadership will, I mean, the CEO of this TrAIl group is an anesthesiologist. The leaders will be the ones coming up with the problems that need to be solved and deciding how those resources are used. Because you're absolutely right. Tech won't even know what the problems are that need to be solved, right? That's fundamentally the challenge. Is if you think about the tech industry, they typically are way younger and way healthier than the patients we see in the ER or the average person in the United States. And so sometimes when I talk to these tech people, they think, well, God, it's going to be so easy to modernize healthcare, because their version of what a medical problem is like, oh, I only have one problem, and it's my blood pressure is 141/82. Right? Versus we obviously way more complex patients. And I think the tech industry just doesn't have a concept of how complex and how sick our patients are, generally speaking. Yeah, question? Yeah. It's a great question. I think 10 years ago, some people said, oh, let's stop training radiologists because we're not going to need them. And now, actually, radiologists are busier than ever. Imaging has gone up 400%, at least in my hospital system, because the patients are so much sicker, right? Like, I had a 95-year-old, a month ago, who had fallen and face planted, and everything hurt. So you have to image everything, and he's on blood thinners, and his blood pressure's low. And his caregiver said he had a fever yesterday. So you have to do so many tests for these people. So I personally think that the complexity of patients and the number of patients that are managed as outpatients is going to continue to rise, and that will actually force us to do more testing, specifically around radiology. I mean, I had to image this guy everywhere. It's so painful. But he was like really sweet. But so I do think at some point, especially the image-based fields, so like radiology, derm, pathology in particular, will get a lot of help. I think it's going to be a long time, I mean, decade or decades until an AI is like in the front seat. I think AI will probably help help prioritize first, right? It'll say, hey, we're pretty sure that there's a pneumothorax on this chest x-ray. You should read that one first. But I think both from a liability perspective and a safety perspective, medicine is not going to be okay with AI just running the show for a really long time, partially because the AI companies are not going to be open to accepting that amount of medical legal risk, honestly. And then additionally, because I think we're going to want proof that it works first. And I mean, you guys know medicine does not move nearly as quickly as any of us would like to when it comes to not only just publishing evidence, but like then getting that evidence rolled out into practice.
What about the role of like community partners, and how do you see that playing together like in that process?
Yeah, I think the main thing that healthcare has over tech right now is we have our data, right? And tech doesn't yet have our data. And so I think community partners will also have access to a lot of really interesting data that they can use too. I think one of the ways that like tech could really show itself as a benevolent partner is by like helping our federally qualified health centers, or like help people who have access to very few resources, like help rural health care. I mean, I think those ways could dramatically improve the care, show that AI is okay in those settings. So I think community partners potentially have a really powerful role to play, but they often, lack the connections to tech as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys for having me.